My name is Velia Lara. I am the Director of Demographic Studies. I know a handful of you already who have worked with me on the Attendance Boundary Advisory Committee. I've been with the department since 2009, so I still feel like I'm a little bit new. It's been an adventure and a challenge. I welcome your input, your questions. Constantly learning and trying to improve our processes, and my partner in crime is Michael Tommy Wells. He goes by Tommy. Legally, in Outlook, he's Michael Wells, and he's a GIS analyst for the department.
Yes, and I've been with the district since 2006 with a small break in there, so I've seen lots of change throughout the district, and I'm hoping the changes happening now will be good and permanent. So.
Are we ready to begin?
Go ahead.
Okay. So today we're going to talk to you a little bit about our department, which is actually demographic studies. I put demographic studies and campus utilization. Asked to speak on that topic as well. Our department handles that process. You have just met the department. The main functions of our department are demographics and enrollment analysis and projections, attendance boundary planning, campus utilization analysis, GIS analysis, and map design. A little bit about the history of our department's organizational structure. We've experienced several changes within the past 5 years. We're currently part of Budget and Demographic Services under the Finance and Accounting Division, and we have 2 full-time employees. During the 2011-12 cuts that occurred, we were down to 1 full-time employee and part of the District Initiatives and Planning Department, which was under the Chief of Staff Division. Prior to that, I believe from 2008 to 2011, we were in the same department with 3 full-time staff, and then 2008 to 2009 and before, I'm not exactly sure for how many years, but this department was part of Evaluation and Accountability under the Data Compliance and Technology Division with 3 full-time staff and 2 part-time staff at their maximum levels. So a little bit more about our department history. I think it's interesting to note, and something that I learned when I got here, that Dallas ISD was under the desegregation court order from the 1970s until 2003. For many years, the Demographic Studies Department helped manage school assignments and attendance zones based on desegregation rules to try and balance diversity across all schools. Until about the mid-1970s, the district was majority white. By 1980, the district rose to 50% African American. Since the late 90s, the district has been 50% or more Hispanic and continues to grow in that population. And currently, we are about 70% Hispanic, 23% African American, 5% white, and 2% other races. So now moving on to the big rocks that we focus on. The first one is enrollment analysis and projections. Each year, enrollment projections are formulated for each school by grade level and for bilingual and gen ed populations. And the main factors that we use in this process are actual enrollment history, a cohort survival ratio, attendance boundary changes, grade reconfigurations, new and changing programs, and residential developments and demolitions. The projections are used for budget planning purposes by several departments district-wide, and the enrollment numbers also determine staffing levels which are allocated during the budget planning process for campuses.
I have a question. Let's go ahead.
Yes.
What does cohort survival ratios mean?
That's, for example, how many students historically transition or stay at the school for kindergarten to first grade to second grade. A lot of the schools decrease over the years, 4th and 5th grade especially, they start entering the special programs. And so it's just trends between one grade level to the next, the progression of the students.
Thank you.
I also formulate 5-year projections for budget reporting and planning purposes, and I'm currently working on the 2014-15 projections, and we'll need to complete those by early February so they can accommodate the budget planning calendar. The next big rock is attendance boundary planning. And in the packet of documentation that we also provided you, the first 2 pages are an excerpt from the CT local policy, which establishes that the board may approve redesigning attendance boundaries to provide better safety for students and allow for more equitable classroom utilization. And I've highlighted the sections that address attendance boundaries, the factors that are taken into consideration, and the processes. So attendance zone changes can be considered for new schools, consolidation of schools, shifts in population, overcrowding or underutilization, and new and changing programs. Since I've started in this role in 2009, the focus has been the 2008 bond schools, which several of you helped in that planning. Also finishing the 6th grade transition, which moved all of the 6th grade out of elementary schools and into the middle schools, and some of that had to wait on some of the new 2008 middle schools that were built, and also school consolidations that happened a couple of years ago. So the board policy addresses the process and what factors are considered. Area schools are examined to determine the most efficient way to distribute student population within the capacities of each school. Enrollment history and long-term projections provided by the latest demographic study are reviewed. Student addresses are analyzed to determine which areas can be rezoned to another school. Input is gathered from various stakeholders, including trustees, community members, and Dallas ISD administrative staff. And the board-appointed attendance boundary committee also convenes to help with the planning process and to make recommendations to the board. The next slide shows one of the issues that we encounter. Where do students live in relation to school locations? This is something that Louisa's familiar with since she's also been part of the boundary planning process. You can see on the map, which is also included on your handout packet so that you can see these documents a little more clearly. This map shows high school level students, and you can notice that there's clusters of students that don't live anywhere near the school and are actually closer to other high schools like Sunset and Adamson. However, due to school capacity issues, they have to be zoned to Pinkston. So this occurs in some of our areas where the schools are not located exactly where the students live.
And it's each dot some dots may represent 50 students and other dots represent 1.
Right, and that's also what makes it a challenge to draw boundaries that don't look quite so crazy, because it's the numbers that determine where you draw the lines. And if you have a high concentration of students in one area, then you may have to capture a little island or a little peninsula in order to get the numbers that you need. And I've included on the next slide, there's a map for Pershing, which the majority of their students actually come from that northern section, which is 635. This is one of my favorite ones to see. And then I've also included a couple more in your packet for Jefferson and Field Elementary Schools.
And just as an example, Debbie and I are real familiar with the Pershing zone. But another, if you look where it says Walker Middle School, that feeds into W.T. White, and then all the red area is Hillcrest. And the kids that are north of Edie Walker actually go to Franklin, and there's an apartment complex there, but it's got historical reasons for that, and then feeder pattern issues. And so I just thought that was a good example for those of you who haven't been on a boundary committee before to know how someone described it as a Rubik's Cube. It's
Yeah, and a lot of it I think is, and I forgot to show you guys when I briefed on the history, but I also have this book. Desegregation started in the 1970s. This book I inherited illustrates more of the history from 1966 all the way back to 1874, and it's just very interesting to see where we've come from, and it kind of explains a lot of why we are where we are.
Is that what's her name? Rumbley's book?
Rosemary?
No.
Oh, okay. Go ahead.
I think there may be a few of these floating around the district. Walter Schiebel. I don't know. You're welcome to look at it afterwards.
Do you still accept M and M transfers?
I am not familiar with
idea.
that. I know I've seen that code.
Accepting those? Okay, so all of the students are feeding in from their neighborhood into the schools now, not from other neighborhoods.
But this
Okay.
would be called a neighborhood.
Curriculum transfers or
Curriculum transfers?
Still other kinds of transfers.
program transfers or
Do you have those?
Part of the DSEG order included a component minority to majority.
Have you changed that?
And that when that went away, that process stopped.
Okay, so, but you changed that transfer title to other things, haven't you?
Right.
it's just for different reasons.
Yeah, for different reasons, but students can still transfer
Yes.
to other schools based on a certain reason.
Yes.
Right, it's not just on
There's
color
no child
skin
left
and-
behind.
Do you have many of those coming
Any
from?
transfers?
Coming
Yes.
from other districts?
She's got
We can get it. Yeah, we're going to get into that a little bit later.
Theoretically, these are all neighborhood schools because we're trying to populate the existing schools we have. But another one I'm familiar with is Thomas Jefferson. And if you look here, the schools up in the northern quadrant of the boundary, but the population centers are here, and predominantly around Love Field. And it's kind of, in my mind, it's W.T. White's the northernmost DISD high school, so you've got to fill it from the north down, but yet the district's boundaries go all the way to almost to George Bush Freeway. So a lot of W.T. White's kids come from north of the school zone, where the school's located, and then Thomas Jefferson's nearby, and it takes a lot of kids from the south. And so, but then a major factor across the city is that the homes are 50 and 70 years old, and the schools were built when they were new homes, with just like Frisco. Keep going.
What kind of cooperation or support do you get from the city with regards to the demographics piece of this? Is there an equivalent city department? I'm woefully uninformed about city government in Dallas. I'm sorry.
I have been meeting with, I forget what they're called, the planning department on these issues, and I try and keep in close contact with them, and they, I think I've met with them several times and bothered them enough that they know I'm really concerned and that I want to collaborate closely with them on whatever initiatives they become aware of.
So there's an equivalent department in the city government that kind of looks at the demographics and where people are and what's happening to them and what they're doing.
Yes.
And that kind of stuff.
Yes, and I do. I don't know that there has been a collaboration, a very close collaboration between the district and that department, but I do intend to. I have started those conversations.
So you think there's some value in it, and there's things they can do to help you, and that you can do to help them.
Yes, I mean the only issue is they're not focused on school children, but they do have information on families and things like that.
And services available in that. I would just think social services and some of that kind of stuff that we're pairing to education and schools. It would be good to know what sorts of things are available and that kind of stuff. So
I think it's probably pretty segmented in the city side too.
yeah. Yeah.
And the department, I guess it's the economic development group, so I don't know if they're as familiar with the social services. I know they're interested in, attracting corporations to the city and things like that. But yes, well, we are continuing those conversations.
And each council member kind of weighs in on that. They kind of make sure that their area is taken care of, and that when one area spills over into another, make sure that the services are connected. So they do work. So it's through the council person. You have to be on them to make sure the areas are taken care of.
So how do you find out, say, that there's a new major apartment complex being developed?
It's not as easy as you would think. I do get or have access to permit information from the city, which I've learned is not always definitive that it's actually going to happen. It's an approved permit, but there's still a long process from that point to where it's actually going to be built and when is it going to open. And that's one of the main reasons why I try and stay connected with the city, since they do process those applications. But aside from people in the community who can help and relay that information to me, I have found that to be a little bit of a challenge.
Well, it seems to me another area that would be meaningful, and maybe you meant this when you said the planning committee, but for instance, one of the apartment complexes on the north side of Harvest Hill on this Pershing map, 3 years ago they put up a zoning sign, and I called them and said, what's going on? And they said, well, we've been sold. Well, 3 years later, they still have a lot of students.
Right.
The timeline's tough to figure, too.
Right, and I don't know how many of you are familiar with the Midtown development that's being planned in the Valley View area. I was concerned about that plan and met with them specifically on that. And the time frame that they've given me is no earlier than 7 years when they expect to, and there's just so many factors. Even though we may start to see development soon, I believe there's vacant property over there or other initiatives that would probably be prioritized over anything happening to residential area there. So it's hard to tell. And then there was apartment complexes in the Gooch attendance zone that recently closed. And one example of how it's hard to time it is the owner of one of the apartment complexes decided to vacate his complex before it was even sold. So a lot of the students left even before the deal was official, or, way in advance to when we expected to see any kind of movement in that area.
Okay. Why don't you continue through your slides?
So all of this contributes to the issue of campus utilization, which our department is responsible for the campus capacity assessments and calculating campus utilizations for all schools. And I have included maps. Surveys are formulated in collaboration with the facilities department and sent out to schools for input regarding their classroom counts. The classroom information, along with student ratios and a utilization factor of 70 to 75%, are used to calculate campus capacities. Once I calculate the capacities, I send that information out to the schools so that they can review, make sure that the numbers are somewhat in line with what their reality is on the campus. And if there are discrepancies reported to us, we follow up with a physical walkthrough of the building. Unfortunately, we don't have the manpower to walk every square foot of the district. So utilization maps are created for the comprehensive elementary, middle, and high school zones.
Excuse me. So their reason for doing a survey would be you would just have the what's on my data portal, which would have it by grade level, but maybe they might be putting forth a reason to have an extra classroom because of a special program or something.
Well, we're surveying them about their classroom count.
Okay. 23 in one, 15 in another because it's a special program or something like that, because it's hard for you to...
We're actually surveying them on how many classrooms they have in their building. We have floor plans, and we can sit there and count them, but we also don't know exactly what they're using them for, so we have surveyed them to tell us how many classrooms they're using in the building. Actually, how many classrooms they're using, or how many are available to use in case they're under capacity and they have 5 empty classrooms. And when there has been question, we can refer to floor plans that facilities has, or they're also required to submit a floor plan to us that's labeled with what they use each classroom for. So the survey to them is just for the classroom count, and that's what we use as part of our formula.
Okay, but when like, just to pick on somebody, Spruce's capacity is, can't see it, but let's say it's 1914. If their survey comes back and they're adjusting it and they want to say that it's 1850, if you just adjust it, or
No.
Okay.
No, the survey doesn't get... We send one survey first. I'm trying to do that earlier in the summer going forward, to just ask them how many classrooms do you use, how many full-size classrooms do you have, how many half-size classrooms do you have, how many portables, how many stucco classrooms, things of that nature, just to collect that data. Then I input that into our formula, which takes the different average ratios, or the approved ratios for each grade level, elementary, middle, and high. And then we also include a 70 to 75% what's called a utilization factor, because we know there's special programming. There's not always going to be 22 kids sitting in each seat in each classroom. So that allows for some wiggle room. Magnets and alternative schools, I've used the 70% ratio to allow for, the extra special things that they need, labs or dance halls or whatever. And we've also used the 70% utilization factor for the older buildings, which have very small classrooms. In our assessment, I believe we determined that schools, and it was only a handful built before 1930, are really the schools that have small classrooms: Madison, North Dallas. So we wanted to give them a little bit more room as well. And then once the capacities are formulated, we send that information out to the schools to say, does this sound right? Do you feel like you can fit this many kids adequately? And if not, let us know so that we can take a closer look. And this information only accounts for the permanent building utilization.
Do you also look at the portables and factor that in to get the total utilization?
Not for these purposes, not for the planning. When it comes down to attendance boundary changes and things like that, we do account for the portables that are available. But these reports only account for the permanent building, since that's the ideal location of the students. That's what we want to plan for, is the permanent building.
And I've seen a change in that over the years, and the idea is it's not desirable for kids to be in portables, so let's represent the school as what its original footprint is. So that a school everyone is in a classroom, and it might be a portable classroom, but there's still 150% capacity if you've got a large percentage of kids in portables.
Well, it's consistent too with your mandate, which is to set attendance boundaries and stuff based on student safety, and and that's really a safety issue.
And I've included the utilization maps for all 3 levels. High school and middle school have their own utilization maps, and then the elementary schools, we have it broken down into 3 sections so that we can include the detailed enrollment and capacity numbers.
I'm just looking at the Southwest Central Elementary Schools in the supplementary packet. And if I look at the sunset feeder pattern, there are some schools that are 61% next to other schools that are 117, 106%. how do you maintain those boundaries when you've got overcapacity somewhere and really low capacity? What's the kind of logic behind that?
Well, we don't review every single boundary every year. And the focus, like I said, for the past several years was areas where we were opening new schools.
That might be an example where the school is in place, it has portables, community's happy, you don't want to disrupt it, and you buy, if it's 170%, I bet if we pulled up another thing, we'd say it's got 8 portables or something. And so if you included the portables and the capacity, it would not be over capacity, but you still see an imbalance between the adjacent school. But my response is you've got people, likely, if it's like other parts of the city, you have people that are subscribed to that school and don't want to make a change. And the school can still handle that number of kids because they do have the portables.
Right, and we focus on areas where the schools aren't happy or they are having issues due to being overcrowded. Some of these schools that are over 100%, we have a lot of cushion built into the formula, so they may or may not actually be using portables. And again, if they're comfortable, if there's no issues being caused by them being at capacity or slightly over, then we haven't focused on those areas. Now, with the new initiatives going on, I'm not sure if at some point all the attendance boundaries will be reviewed for a better balance district-wide. Okay. That could be something coming up.
Thank you.
So in addition to the big rocks we've already covered, our department provides support to other departments and for other initiatives as well as ad hoc requests. This year we've been supporting the School Choice Project, which Moat Casey is responsible for, and providing data to them, a lot of the similar data that we've shown you, transfer information, numbers.
I'm sorry. Talk more about the School Choice Project and what Moat Casey's doing.
They are assessing school choice options or how our district could implement school choice options.
We actually have them on the calendar we had them on the calendar for today, but since the trustees haven't heard it, we moved them to January 27th.
Okay.
So it's just an analysis, I believe, and they will be presenting their findings in January.
Okay.
We also help with the Physical Assets Ad Hoc Committee, bond planning, early childhood initiatives. These are just recent items that we've assisted with.
What are you doing with the early childhood initiatives?
There's a new executive director who is very interested in growing the program, and he wants to know where in the district there are gaps between the early childhood needs and how many students are being accommodated at different schools in different areas.
For a long time, it was you placed the pre-K where there was space. And so, is that
He's looking to find the gaps and see where more pre-K programs can be added.
Okay. Will that include tuition paying students?
I don't know about that.
You and I can talk about that later.
Yeah, that's no longer an option, I don't think.
It's no longer an option.
I want to hear that too.
The TEA turned it down until even if there are openings on a campus, and the way there's no wait list. If there is someone in another part of the school district that's on a wait list, even though you and I might think it's impractical for them to drive the distance to get where there is an opening, the state says we can't offer it.
And early childhood is also due to percent, I believe, in January, I believe.
I'm sorry. Yes.
Okay.
they'll be presenting. The new director that she mentioned will be at our next meeting.
So any project or initiatives that has to do with school utilization, enrollment trends, transfers, magnet students, we help with that. So these are the most current projects. Previous initiatives have included when Wilmer Hutchins was being annexed. That was the whole process for my predecessor to figure out where we could accommodate that entire district. So she pieced it all out, and then that was actually one of my projects when I got here, was trying to put that puzzle back together when the Wilmer Hutchins schools opened back up. Again, school consolidations, sixth grade transition have been initiatives that our department has supported. And in addition to district initiatives, we get a lot of outside requests. College students call me all the time when they have a paper due next week and they need to know how many second graders are LEP or how many second graders are, in the free and reduced lunch program, different things of that nature. Outside organizations will contact us. If they're filling out grants applications, they need to know sometimes which areas have a lot of economically disadvantaged students, and my answer is that's our entire district. So I get calls from them. We get requests from the media for information, and we also get requests for GIS data, attendance zone information. And on that note, since GIS is the more technical side of what we do, I am going to hand this over to Tommy.
Yes.
To enlighten you on that.
Thank you. So we're going to switch gears now to GIS. So what is GIS? It's an acronym for Geographic Information System. And the program we use is ArcMap, ESRI, which stands for Environmental Systems Research Institute. It also goes by the name of Esri, the company. And we use it to visualize and analyze data to reveal patterns, trends, and relationships in the form of maps and reports. This data is presented in a way that is quickly understood and can easily be distributed, and it facilitates better decision making. So on to the next slide, we have GIS data maintenance, maintain and update data records. In the GIS, data is maintained within a geodatabase, which is a proprietary file system developed by ESRI. In addition to records maintenance, a geodatabase allows for spatial relationships to be observed between data sets of points, lines, and polygons. And data sets that we maintain include attendance boundaries. We only adjust the lines as necessary, and that includes also the feeder patterns. We only do that as necessary as well. Parcel-wise, we get our parcels from the Dallas Central Appraisal District. The data set is updated annually in the summer when DCAD releases final appraisal data. Map data and table data is then obtained from the website, and then we compile those in-house. Currently, there are over 275,000 parcels just within the DISD boundary. Voting districts, we obtain updates for those as necessary as well, from local, state to federal. Since this 2010, a lot of redistricting to the electoral districts, we did have to obtain the newest map layers for those.
The parcel and address?
It's a plot of land, and it has an address generally, yes.
Okay.
What's the reliability of this information? Is it been pretty accurate? There haven't been problems with error, that kind of stuff, as far as you can
for
tell?
which portions?
For the parcels and for the voting
Parcels
district
for the
stuff,
most
or that?
part are correct. If we have a problem, I'm sure they'll change if need be, but I don't think we've found anything that's too off, something that didn't match up somewhere.
Actually, question about that. Oh, I'm sorry.
That's it.
What about the area in South Dallas? Because 70% of the people do not own that land. How is that data looked at?
By DCAD, I'm not sure exactly.
The parcel information doesn't, I mean, somebody owns the data, so we just look at the actual shape of the land or that plot of property.
Not who owns it.
No, we're not, I mean, unless we have a special request, or sometimes we'll look at owner information to determine what's on that piece of property. If it's an apartment complex, then we'll get the name, business name, but yeah, we're not looking at the owners.
Is this software used by the other school districts, so it's pretty commonly used?
Yes.
Okay, and so I'll let you finish, but be thinking about, we heard from the technology task force last year, and we're going to hear from them this year, so if there's anything you want to interject in terms of programming needs, highlight those.
Yeah, professional wise, I mean, it's pretty much the standard. It's what everyone uses.
And we have all the we use all the components, and
Yeah, we use a majority of it. We have a district-wide license, which allows us to use any of their extensions and up to, I believe, 3,000 users. So we have plenty. Other departments do use it as well, like police and security.
And I think mostly larger districts who actually do some of this work in-house, probably the majority of smaller districts outsource to demographics firms to do a lot of this work for them.
All right, on to the next slide. In addition, we also maintain and update street information, which includes street and school assignments. So we'll track and change street names and range, and we'll adjust those as well. This may be prompted by new developments and urban renewal, so we may have new streets from that. At the moment, we have over 38,000 street segments within the DISD boundary that we have to take a look at and change as needed.
So anytime, I'm sorry,
No.
anytime there's a boundary change, attendance boundary change, those street segments have to be evaluated and reassigned with the specific address ranges that are going to be affected.
and then that tells the realtors when there's.
Street issues are investigated using online resources. In the event that the online resources are lagging by a significant amount of time or are in dispute, physical observation by driving the streets may be necessary. And in 2005, during the Wilmer-Hutchins integration, the department drove extensively in the area to track streets and to determine exactly where the students were living. Yeah. So Student Record Services works closely with our department to verify street address information and school assignments, and that's maintained in their Chancery database.
And that department's under teaching and learning, or?
I believe they're under technology.
Okay.
At Samalia's group, data compliance and support.
All right, on to the next section is student location geocoding. So what is geocoding? It's a process to create geographic coordinates from other geographic data, resulting in location points with latitude and longitude. And these location points are mapped within the GIS. So basically these are where the students are living, those dots you see on the map.
Just thinking about those dots, a lot of analytic software, if you were going to use a dot, right, you'd have an itty bitty dot for one person, then it'd be a big dot for like
Right,
100
yeah,
kids.
density.
Right, so
Right.
it gives you that sense. Does the GIS software allow for that too?
Yes.
Okay, so when we could look at these maps, we could potentially see that density.
Yeah, we can create heat maps, as they're called. Yeah, those things can be done, definitely.
Okay, thanks.
So we're collecting the student information
Right.
and then putting it into the software that maps it for us.
Yes.
So if I were to ask you, how many, 10-year-olds are in a particular area, regardless of whether they attend DISD or not, does that information that we have, or we just know about the folks that do attend?
Folks that do attend, we know that for sure. Other data, we don't really know.
We wouldn't have address information to plot those 10-year-olds. But we could have census data, which would be, an estimate of a certain area, like a zip code or a census tract or census block, but we wouldn't be able to pinpoint exactly where they live.
And the census data would be dated.
Yes.
Yeah.
Would your
Census.
would your data ever flag or alert you if, for example, so our magnet schools, some people, will do anything to get their kids in there, right? So some people will take a single family house and, suddenly there are 5 kids that are all freshmen going to, Booker T or TAG or whatever. Are you able to see that kind of activity or
We
no?
could, but we're not currently using it for that.
Okay.
If someone had asked us for that information, I'm sure we could get something like that. But, I mean, it's hard for us to say who's a family and who's not. Something that's small. Now, of course, if one of those single-family homes has 40 people, there's a problem.
Right.
But maybe 4 or 5. Be a little bit difficult that way.
Okay, thanks.
I have started to try to analyze that, especially in areas where attendance numbers are unexplainable. But it's really tricky. There's
Like a needle in a haystack.
yeah.
Okay, for the next section in the student locations, student points are created using an address locator, so this is a little bit more technical. This is how we actually place them on the map, based on street names and ranges from the geodatabase. Student location points are used to analyze spatial relationships with attendance boundaries and school campus locations while revealing student population trends year over year. We geocode the students twice a year, once in October to coincide with the PEIMS official student counts, and again in the spring. And as you see, our most recent geocode in October, we had over 160,000 student location points. All right, on to the next slide. This is into our mapping, our district mapping, static and interactive. We have on our district website, we have static maps. Types of the district-wide maps we have on there. All boundaries, elementary, middle, high, strategic division, trustee maps. And this is just a small section. This isn't every single map we have out there. We have quite a few. And you can download them as a PDF, or they can be printed to all size proportions by our graphics department. And also you'll find attendance boundary maps on the website as well. So all campuses that have an attendance boundary will be there. And this has historical data all the way to 2005. A new addition to our mapping is an interactive map that is a school site locator by Davis Demographics. It's a web-based map, and you can select the elementary, middle, or high attendance boundaries, and you can actually interact with the map. You can put your address, and you can go to that location. You can see information. You can even have driving routes from your location to the schools.
So if I put my address in there, it would tell me what my elementary, middle, and high schools are?
Yes.
And there's 2 ways you do that. There's a pull-down menu that pulls up the list of schools, but I think what he's talking about is an actual map, and you type in your address and it goes. So I just wrote down a note to send you guys the link because it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, it is. What's nice about it too is it's encoded in HTML5, so you can actually use it on your phone or on a tablet. It'll size itself to whatever you're using. All right, on to the next slide.
I have a question. Do y'all provide to maybe just trustees or other admin kind of annual trends summary of the trends that y'all that have gone on the last 12 months? From this information that y'all have, or is it only upon request that y'all provide specific information?
We have been providing mainly on request. But we can touch on that later as well.
So this is an example of one of the maps we have online. This is a letter size school location map. A lot of our maps in this area, the district maps, are quite dense in information, so it would be really hard for you to even see anything if I tried to place on here. But I recommend looking online at our website to see them because they are pretty nice.
Now, if you walk into a registrar's office, I've seen bus route maps, and maybe transportation creates those. But a recommendation we had the first or the second year of the Budget Commission was, because of our high mobility rate, was to post an attendance zone map for the feeder pattern in each school. Did you all ever did that request ever come to you? Because the idea was, a child's at such and such elementary school but has a family need to move. It'd be nice if they can stay within the attendance zone of this, they don't have to make a school change. So the recommendation was post those maps. But
I did see that, and I think we responded, and that would basically be a budget and planning. I'm not sure who would pay for that. The graphics department now prints the wall size maps, so that would just be a decision that needs to be made in the upper management level to get those printed out for all the schools.
The next slide has a map of an example of our attendance boundary maps. This is for Martin Luther King Jr. Learning Center, so you can get an idea of how those look.
These are also in your packet, your document.
And the next slide is our special request maps. Interdepartmental map requests. It's very common for us to get map requests like this. Examples include College and Career Readiness Department. They requested program location maps, and all in all, the total maps created were 9 for that request. We also had a public information request for property values in Hillcrest High School and White High School. Within those attendance boundaries, there was over 35,000 parcels, which were used by, I believe it was Darlene Miller, right, to determine
Yes.
The overall value of the land in those two attendance. It was a public information request. And then we also had recently a request for Dallas Environmental Science Academy student location map from the Transportation Services Department. And you'll see in your map packet these a little bit better. This is the College and Career Readiness Department map. This is just one of the 9 we created. On to the next map. This is the public information request. We didn't distribute this map, we just distributed the information, but it required creating this set of data anyway, so I went ahead and made the map for you. You could visually see what was used.
Or that Lakewood ISD request? I think that's what it was for.
you think so?
Dallas Morning News may have requested that.
This doesn't include the
Hillcrest
Lakewood
and
area.
White?
Did he do one for Wilson? I don't think there was one for Wilson.
Not sure.
Not it?
We just don't know why they asked. We're just curious.
They don't always give
yeah, I was gonna say,
we
we don't
hardly
always
ever
get a
get
reason.
reasons.
Just do it, huh?
We can find that out.
But I don't believe we did get 2 separate requests, but I think it was just these 2 feeder patterns. I don't think we got anything for Wilson.
And on the next map slide, this is the map that was created for Transportation Services, the location for the DESA students. And as you can see, we have students, at least one student that lives up in the Junkins area that attend school in West Dallas, and then one as well in Seagoville near the county line, at least. So they're traveling quite a distance.
Is DESA a middle school?
Yes.
Okay.
Science fair.
And in reference to trying to find the concentrations of students, I've also created maps that are color coded based on the parcel type. So I've highlighted the multifamily parcels in red, commercial in my gray, and single family in yellow. So you can very easily see where the concentrations of multifamily housing are across the district. And I did that when we were looking at the new Bush School in Addison, which was a challenging attendance zone to design because the majority of the students that moved there were not located near the school, and there's a lot of commercial and industrial between where the students are coming from and the school's location. So you could kind of see where the big empty gap was.
how is it coded for those that are multi-use, like residential, like uptown, residential up on top and retail, or?
I guess that would be mixed use. I don't know. I focus on the
But you include that residential unit though, right, in y'all's data?
I'll have to look at that. I'm pretty sure that it would show as multifamily if they have apartments.
That's another big factor when you've got these big sections of office buildings or warehouses that appear to make an attendance zone look unreasonable, but you have to understand where the gaps are, what's in the gaps.
How soon do you guys look at when an area of multi-family use been closed down and it opening back up? How soon do y'all look at how many students are going to be in that area?
In my time, I haven't really experienced any huge multifamily developments that have brought a lot of students. A lot of the development is replacement units, and they're usually higher end, so they're replacing really old apartments where we did have a lot of students, but the new developments aren't bringing in new students.
I'm talking about like Bonton, everything ready, opening it back up again.
For Bonton, which is the Dallas Housing Authority, I had to work very closely with them to get actual student information because they are the ones that knew who the applicants were and what the family information was.
Okay, so how soon do we look at it as a district to see how it's going to affect that area, the high school, the middle schools in that area?
I mean, as soon as we have the information, we start looking at that. And initially, I didn't really have a good idea of how many students were coming. I have gotten better information now, but I think the families are still trickling in phases, and they've had some issues opening up the units because of vandalism. Yeah, and they had vandalism and burglaries there recently, I believe.
In school.
In the schools.
Talked about demographic information a fair amount, of course. Are you looking at like birth records to project what enrollment will be and where it will be?
I have not used that information, but I do want to start looking at that. I know that's something that other districts look at. I'm not sure that birth rates here really correlate as well, but I do intend to use that and start seeing how it does correlate to use that going forward.
Well, and the people at Commit are looking at that, so you could probably start sharing with them, or you may already have a relationship with them.
Do you have any other, Louisa had asked if you had any technology sort of needs, and I'm just curious, it sounds like with what you're doing today, you have everything you need as far as I understand, but I'm curious, some of those projects where you do have other ideas of other types of data, do you have the data sources, do you have the databases, do you have the infrastructure you need?
We can get into that in one of the
Goals,
next
yeah.
It's listed.
But yeah, this looks like a normal.
Oh, the next page, though.
Oh, this
This is our current expenses.
I'm ready.
The wish list is in the back.
Let's get to that one.
And I tried to be conservative, but since you want to go beyond, I'll go
I'm
there
a
with
data
you.
geek. I love this stuff.
Okay.
It's in our department.
So then we need to.
Ask anytime. We don't get anything.
So this page outlines some of our main expenses. The top one is map printing supplies, and these are estimates that I've been able to put together. There's a note at the bottom. Our department hasn't had a separate budget or organization number in recent years, so I wasn't very easily able to just run a report. But these are things that I know we use. The ArcMap software is the Esri that Tommy spoke about, and that is $20,000 a year annually. I believe it is unlimited as long as it's for educational use, administration, and it can also be used for curriculum. Several years ago, I believe there was a program in GIS at Conrad, but that has not continued. School Site Locator is the online interactive map tool, which is $2,500 annual. This year we brought in a new school site planning software, which should help with the boundary planning. It makes it a little more automated instead of us having to move lines and count dots ourselves. So that's new for this year, and we had an additional $5,000 for the setup, and $5,000 of the training also went towards that software. Conferences and training, $4,000 to $10,000. There's an annual conference for ESRI that I like for one of us to attend at least every few years. And the training and conferences that we attend are for GIS and TASBO. Another main expense is student assignment letters. This depends on what kind of activity we're having on attendance boundary changes. The year we had the Wilmer Hutchins and several schools opening, the cost was a little bit higher. Other years it's not as much, just depending on who all is changing. And then demographic study is a big one that is done about every 5 years. It was done in 2012 and previously in 2007. The one for 2012 was $300,000 approximately, and I don't have the actual price on the one in 2007, but I imagine it was about the same.
So, go ahead.
When organizations or people request the map information, do you charge them for that particular?
To develop the actual map?
Well, if you have it on, if it's already programmed, you just have to give them the copy. But do you still charge them for that particular copy, or?
That's usually up
No,
to information people.
Yeah, we provide, departments that request information, if it's a map that's already developed, we would just send them an electronic file. And if they want it printed in a larger format, then that would be a request that goes to graphics, and that they do charge for that.
They will in graphics charge.
Yes, graphics will
I didn't see
charge.
any incoming funds here for things like that. Okay.
Previously, when we were handling that, we did not charge. And I believe in previous years there was departments could contribute supplies and things like that. But I felt it just made more sense, since printing is what they do, that they could handle that more efficiently than our department, and so we could focus on actually creating the maps and developing them, and then they could handle the print requests.
I was laughing at the story because she actually had a printing machine over at
Yes, we had the big plotter and everything that Tommy and I would handle, and I had the pleasure of having to change one of those rolls, which isn't very easy. And it's a 60-inch plotter, so it's pretty big. And I had already wanted to move that function over to graphics, and they can use the added revenue. And then, having to handle the printing request was an interruption to our day, and, we're trying to focus on the analysis, and so that has been a good change, I think. So we gave them the big plotter and asked for free maps occasionally.
And wish them good luck.
Yeah.
So, what else do you want to know?
Goals, the wish list.
Okay, there we go. So the department goals at a high level are technology improvements. At a minimum, I think it's time for Tommy to get a more beefed up computer. He often has challenges, especially with our big detailed maps that have all the street detail and everything. He's constantly crashing, and then just analyzing the amount of data that we do and the number of students sometimes can be difficult. Online mapping functionality is something that I've been interested in ever since I knew it existed, and so I've asked Tommy to try and learn more about that and see how we can incorporate that on our website, or just as a resource to support other departments or anybody who wants to use this information, and to just continue to improve efficiency using the latest GIS technology. Demographics analysis. With only 2 of us in the department, it is a little bit of a challenge to do more than just the basic requirements that we have for day-to-day tasks and current projects and things like that. But I do want to increase our demographics analysis processes and reporting. And the last page is one example of something that I started to do for my own purposes when I got to this department, and has proved to be useful to others. And so I would like to do more of this, really get into more of the analysis. Also expand our analysis to include as much of the school-age populations within the city and surrounding municipalities as we can, which again is more of an estimate from census data, but I think it's worth taking a look at.
And then, I'm sorry, were you finished?
Oh, the last thing is just increased GIS analysis district-wide. As Tommy said during his portion, it's a visual analysis of data that reveals patterns, trends, and relationships in the form of maps and reports. So I think sometimes the GIS, the presentation, can give another perspective, and sometimes a clearer picture of what the broader picture is. You get a bird's eye view of what's going on in relation to different locations or different areas of the district. It's presented in a way that is quickly understood and can easily be shared, and it facilitates better decision making. Some departments have come to me. Early childhood is one who, as soon as he got here, he was obviously familiar with GIS, so he came to me, I think, 2 weeks into the job and had a long list of maps that he wanted us to create for him. So hopefully that'll spread, and other departments will see the benefit. And that's it.
I had a couple of questions on things that you could be doing, and I think you and I have talked about it before, but on the revealing patterns and trends, if you think about what happened in Uptown or what happened in Conrad and where older housing, multifamily housing came down and new housing went up without children, then trying to understand where those children went so that we can anticipate where they might go with the next development like Midtown, or would these tools allow you to do that, just to get ahead of it so that we don't have...
Yes, and I did start to think about that. I guess it would depend on how far back our data goes. We would need, and I don't know that we have geocoded students that far back. And I don't know how far back the address information would go either, but it would kind of depend on what data would be available to us.
I guess another, maybe it would be more helpful if you could tell us what you get from the demographic study. That's why at the last minute I asked Gilbert to have you bring the notebook or something. But
right here if you want.
Yeah. We spent $300,000 for it, and I know it added value based on what people said, but what does it tell you? That
well, and I haven't read through the whole thing, but it goes into housing projections and workforce information and the student and the household trends based on multifamily areas, and it actually goes into detail for each high school feeder pattern area. They actually walk the streets and talk to developers and get an idea of what the expectations are for the next 5 to 10 years. And then we also actually get student projections for small planning units across the district, which are smaller pieces within each attendance boundary, to say how many students they expect to be living in those areas for each grade level for each year all the way to 2020. So
have their projections been, are we able to tell, how do we use them and how accurate have they been?
Well, I reference them when I'm making boundary changes, and I guess the thing that makes it hard is that they aren't projecting a huge growth or decline anywhere, so it's pretty static, and that's where we've been for the past several years. So really, they're not projecting much of a change anywhere in the district, at least until 2020, and that's the data that we have. There's maybe just 2 small areas where they're showing any growth at all.
And do you think that's reliable?
That's based on the TIF districts and the low-income housing plans, and so that depends on if it actually comes to fruition. I'm a little bit skeptical of if that's really going to happen or not.
So how does it relate to establishing your board policies? How do they come together?
Board policies?
Yeah. Establishing the board policies, you do use that data, that $300,000 worth of data. Does that ever coincide, or are they separate?
The board policies that address attendance zone planning?
Well,
Do you have anything addressing?
I think it's been used to decide, to help with bond programs. Am I right?
Yes, and I wasn't here for the last bond program planning effort. That was before my time here. But yes, the one that was done in 2007 was used for the bond planning
Okay, I was just wondering
efforts.
how they use that.
But it seems like what I heard you say was that this is really a significant amount of information that's outside and above and beyond what you guys gather and look at to work with to make your projections and analyses.
Yes.
So it's additional information that you couldn't gather yourself.
Right.
Especially just 2 of you.
Yes.
Anybody else have any questions?
Can I just ask, so is this map, all these kids go here?
No.
No.
The attendance boundary is the line in the shaded area, and then we just plotted the grade level students. So that's an elementary school boundary, and those are where we're showing that elementary students live.
Field kids are probably in, because I'm familiar with, no, these kids
There is
are
a park.
Barnett and other schools, but within that box for field, that's where the dots represent high concentration.
Right, and the majority of them actually come from that southern little tip that's actually closer to Saldivar.
Right.
Field is, everything around Field is industrial, except for a couple of apartment complexes right near Field, and I think what she's trying to say is down there in the southern part, because Saldivar doesn't have any room and Field does, those kids get bused up there. Is that a good answer? Good.
Yes, those are apartment complexes down there in that little corner.
Yeah, but then all the dots to the right, I'm guessing, are Burnett and I'm drawing a blank.
Burnett, Figueroa, Callier, and Marcus. Those are the attendance boundaries that are
And those
in that
are-
area.
Pretty much homes in there. So, do you have some questions? For Delia?
Well, I interested in the impact of the school choice initiative, obviously. So we'll hear about that later. I was also interested in whether or not you had just general information about the number of potential fourth graders in an area. You know, does the district make any? This isn't really your department; you're just doing the data. But you know, are we making an attempt to recruit those people into the district as opposed to going to private schools or whatnot?
I think there's a push to improve all of our schools so that they're.
Yeah, I know. Sure, but I'm just talking about, are we reaching out to the community to, you know?
Our department is not reaching out to the community, but I know, you know, in general, there's about 18 to 20% of school-aged children in the Dallas area that are attending other schools.
As a follow-up, I'd like to see the survival ratios that you talked about, the trends. So, and how could you present that to us? That when you that so many people don't continue into 5th grade or whatever, and do we know where they go? Are we able to track that through PEMS or
The enrollment projections and the cohort ratios are based on enrollment numbers, but not specific student address information. So those are two different data sets. I mean, I could merge them to do that kind of analysis, but they're currently two separate
Doing
things.
a general
Right. So for the
to predict that. I mean, you could look at my data portal and see the changes district-wide, grade to grade, and so it's that generalized.
yes, so if there's, if we need to look at something in more detail to see exactly where these kids are going to, then that would
Or a
be
special
more.
request.
Yes.
Would it be helpful to have exit interview information from, this is something that several of us have talked about for a long time, is that if a family does opt out to go to private school or to do it, even just to go with a magnet school, but would it, or to move to Richardson, or to, I don't
Well,
know.
it's in
What about
some,
charter schools?
or any of them. I mean, that was,
In the area.
Would that sort of exit interview information be helpful in decision making, or would that just be sort of almost incidental?
well, that was
That would be
something.
for school improvement. I mean, that.
Well, yeah, that too, but also just for planning. If
Well, it was something we had talked about 2 years ago was when someone comes into the registrar and they're leaving. I mean, sometimes they're going to the neighboring elementary school because they've moved, or they're staying in DISD but they're moving because of a family situation, or they're going to all the things that you already listed, and so we had suggested just ask them, and come up with reason codes where they're going.
Look, it makes sense to me that a campus would want to know if you're at Lakewood Elementary School and you lose half of your third grade class going to fourth grade because they're all going to tag or whatever private schools, then the school needs to know that and understand what's going on. But I was wondering if that would be helpful on this more, because you're a 10,000 foot level instead of a 2,000 foot level.
I think that would probably be more beneficial at the 2,000 foot level.
The campus level.
And, unless it's Skeet ISD is opening all the, every single one of their schools is going to be pre-K through 12. And so all of our student population on that part of town is, starting to go in that direction, then that would be our planning. But
Do you think it would be beneficial to actually denote if there are charter schools, because those are free public schools, in any of these areas that you have?
Map them?
Map them, right, because sure enough, if they're not going to go to a private school or transfer within the district, but if we kind of knew that there are 3 charter schools here beside or in the area of Pinkston. I'm just throwing that out.
that's actually,
Is that in there?
there's actually a map in here that maps the charters.
Okay.
So we do have that. And then our department,
Basics.
well, they've done it here, and I believe the charter information is available on the TEA website. So that's something that it's not.
No, I'm saying it is, and not only you wouldn't have to go to TEA. You could request it, just like Don Painter comes in and says, I want all the addresses of everybody in DISD so I can get them to do their school pictures. We can do the same to Uplift, and that's why any of us with school-age children have received flyers from any number of people, because all that information's public.
So, and your estimate, it was with 15 to 20% of the students, of children in
18 to 20 or more.
18 to 20, so 32,000 students don't go.
I've got 11,000 in charter and 30,000 in private schools, depending on how you count them, because the private schools, you're just kind of guessing, because there could be kids that fill in the blank private school that are outside of our district.
That's throughout the district.
Right.
11,000
But-
charter.
Just, I didn't realize.
Yeah,
that
I have data that we're able to get using our software. They actually provide a lot of demographics data. I think estimating from the age levels of 5 to 19, I believe that came out to about 209,000 total in those age ranges, which would be about school age, and we have about 160 of them, so yeah, about 40,000.
Go ahead.
So, how about new charter schools that are going to be opening in South Dallas? Is that something that is factoring into your, forward-looking analysis?
Ones that are going to open soon or next year?
KIPP Academy is somewhere in the process of opening schools in South Dallas. I mean, that's going to, in the aggregate, it's a small number, but for a neighborhood, it could, be significant for a local elementary school.
Well, the district is supposed to be notified for any application for a charter that's adding a new campus or making a change to a campus. So those have been, I think all of them have been coming through my office, so we would be made aware of that and use that information.
And so,
because we're actually supposed to respond if we feel that it's going to impact our district greatly, then we respond to the TEA in regards to that.
So
Before they are given the application?
Before they're approved, I believe.
Okay, all right.
So are there any charter schools proposed to be open in the district for next year?
Not that I've seen.
Something to think about. You and I have talked about this before, but what I'd like to see in the data analysis is we've got schools at all grade levels that are have enough children in their attendance zone, but they're subscribing to another campus, and so that's what's depicted here. And it's more than just magnet schools. In some cases, the big number shifts are due to a boundary being changed, but I keep bringing up the example of Carter High School that's enrollment is declining, but their attendance zone, they've got enough kids in the attendance zone to fill the school, but they go elsewhere. But it might be that what I would like to know is at what point do they opt out of the feeder pattern? What I'm familiar with in my area, it might be that someone is not interested in their assigned elementary school, so they'll choose something else, and it has their decision then just, they stay on that trend, that trajectory of going to another feeder pattern or a magnet school, and they made the decision in kindergarten, but then there are other people who make the decision in 8th grade or 5th grade. They don't want to go to the middle school. Do you look at any kind of when that happens?
Well, definitely more of it starts at the 6th grade because you just have a huge number of programs available to choose from. So that's why there's so many students that are not going to their assigned school starting at the middle school level, and high school as well. There's just so many options for them that a lot of these students, they choose the Town View or Booker T.
But I see and we can't solve it today, but if you took these charts, and maybe I should do it, and eliminated the magnets, you still have a lot of...
Yes. Yes, and that's part of what Moat Casey is looking at to try and determine what is causing that, or
a lot of unofficial choice.
Yes, a lot of
we're already doing school choice, but just not intentionally.
Right.
Or intentionally, like with a...
And to try and determine what it is at the schools that are the choices that could potentially be added to the schools that aren't the choices.
Yeah, you work with the transfer department, the department that actually, approves the transfers.
I don't really work with them in their processes. The data that I'm using here just is an analysis of where the student is enrolled compared to where they live. So this doesn't even, I think the numbers are pretty close to actual transfer applications that are approved, but that's not what this data is based on. We're actually looking at the map and seeing, okay, this student lives here, but they're enrolled in that school over there.
This is mapping. Okay. The last thing that I'm interested in seeing or discussing is we used back at the beginning you talked about understanding where the bilingual kids are, and I can't remember what you said.
Enrollment projections are done
So
for
you're
general.
looking at bilingual because it has different program needs, and something we discussed when the MLEP people came was they were talking about the success of the two-way dual language program, but the school there, it's in only like a dozen schools or something, but if you expanded it further, there would be this need of balancing the bilingual kids with the English speaking kids. Has there been any discussion on that, or you would have the ability to do that?
I would have the ability to do that as long as the child is coded as the bilingual or however MLEP codes them and their address information.
Okay. All right. Anybody else have questions?
The hardest working person ever, both of you.
Two
Thank you so much, both of you.
No, you don't get credit. You give them their wish list, we might give you some credit.
That's an easy one.
Said that earlier, and I
So we'll be fully trained to have lots of questions when the school choice people come. So,
Does anybody have interest in this?
yeah, I asked them to bring it, so any of us.
I don't know
I
if you
think you
can
should
lend
read it,
it.
Louisa.
Yeah, brief us on the next one, okay?
Expecting
Charts and all.
No, seriously, we should be
It's
thinking
amazing.
about its value. I mean, $300,000. It was. Jose, help me if I've got the right years, but we did not do a demographic study before we opened Conrad, and the feeling was we should have.
Because, yeah.
And so now we're doing it, but are we using it? But of course, we don't have a bond program, so I don't know how it's used.
We should be having one soon, so that's going to help.
Yeah.
Now, like City of Dallas or Dallas County, do they do this, and is it similar, or is this different and it's just fit the needs for education?
I haven't talked to them about that. I imagine they do something similar, but it's not focused on
This is
schools.
focused on schools.
This is focused on our students.
I was just thinking shared resources and
Yeah.
shared
I've
costs.
thought, yes.
No.
Yeah, that's what I'm getting at. We're talking about working with the city.
So I do not like double work or reinventing the wheel.
Well, thanks very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Good presentation.
We have a very aggressive agenda for January. We have 2 dates, and so today might have been just a little light because we dropped some of the topics, but they're coming back in January, and so there's some big topics as well. So just FYI, prepare yourselves for a long night in the next 2 days. I think it's the 11th? No, 13th and the 27th. So.
Jim had some questions about the agenda.
Just general questions, sort of. One is, I think, reading either the blogs or the papers, I'm not sure where, talk about reopening some schools.
That's correct.
Obviously, that could have a significant financial impact on things. What are the plans, if any, that are on the drawing board? What's being discussed, and could we get some information on that?
So that's going to be the big packet with the school choice. A lot of the components, a lot of the things that you are listening to or hearing are coming together within the school choice options. And they will be included in there. For example, I know that you mentioned Thompson earlier, and Velia is in those conversations as well. So, but there's just not a definite decision made yet. For example, Harley was an example that they're talking about reopening as an early childhood type of center. But all those sorts of things are being compiled, and they will be addressed at the school choice.
And when's that being presented to the board?
I believe is you'll hear it on the 13th, so they will hear it before then.
Okay.
Or the 27th, I'm sorry. So they'll be presented at the board briefing in January.
Okay.
That's when that will be presented, and then we're hoping to have the same group come and present to you guys.
Okay. Something else.
Sorry.
No, Lucy, go ahead. Obviously, the new compensation system is going to have a big impact.
Right.
We've heard something about that, and we've seen some broad numbers. Are we going to be hearing more about that with details? I'd really love to see Jim's calculations, basically.
Well, actually, they're Gilbert's calculations now, but
Oh,
no.
all right.
They're still Jim's. There is a component that will be, the superintendent came and presented to you on the Teacher Excellence Initiative,
Right.
and he offered to come back and discuss it further. That piece of it obviously is evolving, and there was a slight update on the last briefing, and there will be continuous updates on that topic. As a matter of fact, we are scheduled to, the district is scheduled to, or the administration to present to the board and have a workshop on the 11th of January on that topic.
Okay.
So it's opened, but again, he offered to come back and discuss it further, and we can certainly invite him back to have another discussion on the topic, and hopefully it will be more with a lot more information and data.
I mean, to be candid, I'm interested in the dollars.
Exactly.
So
specifically right now,
I mean, I would be, just speak for myself, of course, but just as happy to hear from you in terms of how does the model work.
Exactly.
Because we're making these comparisons to what the compensation would look like for teachers going forward versus under the current plan. Jim made some general statements about the relatively minor budget implications for that, but I'd like to really understand the assumptions underneath that and how that actually pencils out.
Okay, so there is quite a bit of assumptions in the model, and so there's 3 groups actually doing, just so that you know, the superintendent's creating his own. We're doing our own evaluation, and then DMC, which has been working with the teacher evaluation, is going to do an independent study as well. And as a matter of fact, we just finalized all the details with that. And so the perspective that we're looking at, we do take we set the historical context to see where we've been in the past few years and then where we're at now. And so what we'll do actually in our model, we'll see where it will take us if we just stay where we're at with our own current compensation model. And then we're going to start, the third piece of it is it sustainable? Based on the assumptions that the superintendent has put into the concept paper. So we're looking at those 3 ways. Where have we been? What has the trends been in terms of teacher evaluation, retention, retirements, and so on and so forth, and how much budget has taken for those positions? Where are we now? And if we just extended it, and then of course with the assumptions. So that's what we're looking at, and I am working very closely with one of our analysts in the budget office to develop that. As a matter of fact, I think we're going to have a draft by Wednesday, but again by the 11th it will be sort of finalized. I don't have a problem presenting that at one point or another, but I think to fill the whole concept and have context to everything and all the different models, I think it would be great to just present the whole thing again at one point or another with all the 3 components, with the superintendents, the budget assumption or the budget piece, and then of course the DMC model that they come up with.
I'm just I'm sensitive to time. We're
Absolutely.
trying to get some other things done, and so I don't want that to squeeze out something else we've got planned.
Exactly. Again, we can talk about where we can fit it in earlier if you want to talk about it. I mean, if you want to see it. But again, the workshop will be on the 11th, and maybe after that.
What time is that going to be?
It will be from 9 to 12.
9 to 12.
Mm-hmm.
So the piece on compensation for the 13th, is that relevant is that too soon to put that? Being redundant?
I think when we were talking about the compensation, you just wanted to, regardless of the...
That was before we had the teacher.
Exactly. So, and they are preparing for that already. I've been getting quite a bit of questions from those departments. They might be, well, they really won't be able to touch on the topic of the teacher piece, but they might have some information on it. But again, it's the budget office that's doing the study, or the NDMC. So,
Sorry, what's DMC?
it's the District Management Council. It's the company that's been working with the evaluation system.
Well, I guess my concern is we had recommended to the board, and the board voted on it, to compensate teachers for their unused sick days when they leave the district. And I looked at the board policies. I haven't seen anything new pertaining to that. So where are we at?
So that specific, as a matter of fact, they're developing the guidelines for that, and they may be able to. I think I asked them to touch on that in their presentations. Yes, it will be.
All right.
But we did set the budget aside for that, and it's just trying to determine what and how they're going to evaluate it and use it. But there is I believe we put $500,000 for that.
Will that be enough money?
Well, again, depending on the guidelines that they're developed.
If they make the guidelines work.
Exactly.
It shouldn't be enough.
So Darville actually asked me to if they needed to touch on that, and I told them to. They will be talking about
Are
that.
they still working on it? Working on the guidelines?
I'm not exactly sure where they're
At the
at.
lawyer's office or
Somewhere.
human? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Okay.
And it could be costly, because when I retired, I had 100 days. But I had to throw them out the window, you know? So, it can be costly.
We're looking at substitute teachers coming in. We're trying to work on the fact that teachers are staying at home because they don't want to throw away their days.
But I could give some to the sick bank, but
Still,
I just, that was a good days.
yeah, you're not
They don't want you to be
motivated.
absent.
You're still
I
not
don't like
motivated
being
to
absent,
come
but
to
they-
work, you know. So we need to motivate teachers to come to work because our students need them. They don't need the substitutes.
Absolutely. So the package that or the presentation that we'll make will actually touch as well on the substitute pool model that we also approved in the budget. So both of those topics will actually be addressed then.
Like,
Yeah. Like I said, it's going to be a very full agenda. I think it will be.
just had wanted it to start this school year. Do it quickly.
It will actually take place this school year. It will be implemented this school year. Yes, ma'am.
Will be?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Do teachers know about it?
Yes. As a matter of fact,
Good.
yes, they do.
One.
It was actually distributed in one of the district-wide mails. And
Very
it's been-
good.
and it's-
Okay.
So yes.
Well, this is hearsay, I don't know, someone asked me this, that we needed to beef up our, it's not called, what's it called, personnel, human capital, that's the name of personnel now? That, we needed to hire more people because people, were kind of lax and they hired more people, but the people who were there did not get the raise that the people who came in did. I'm just asking, is that...
Hearsay? No, I don't know. But that would be a good question for Chief Darville when she presents.
Is she going to present?
I know there's different components. So, for example, compensation it will be Ms. Theory. The benefits department has their own director, so I think she's kind of spaced it out for them to make the actual presentations. But I'm certain that she will be here.
I personally, because my wife's an employee, we've had issues. And they got dealt with because people that I know within the district. But if it wasn't for the people that I know, and she was just a regular employee, my concern is because of the lack of communication within that department, because that's what it boiled down to, they wouldn't have gotten the response that I received. And so that's what I'm concerned about, is communication and training for that department.
Hopefully, she will be able to address some of those items.
Well, with each of our meetings, you're welcome to submit questions ahead of time. It helps the presenters.
I just didn't know. I tried to look here to see when they were going to present, but I didn't see it on there.
Don't send it the day before or the day no.
Actually, I've emailed her.
me because I said something this afternoon.
We've been emailing back and forth, and so I'm going to go ahead and ask her outside, but I was going to warn her that it will be asked in this setting as well. So.
You had something else, Jim?
So can we talk about the calendar schedule?
Absolutely.
What we're, mostly I'm interested in the sequencing of when we're going to see a budget relative to when the commission needs to make its recommendations to the trustees.
So I believe the recommendations will, obviously you wanted to make them as early as possible, but I think in the calendar, I think we're thinking around March where the recommendations will come. I can tell you that, of course, Velia talked about the projections, which is our main driver for us, one of the main drivers for us to start actually staffing the campuses for the following year. So it's very important for her information to get to us, and that would be around the end of January, the middle of January is when she's going to hand it off to us. We start doing the calculations, then send it to the campuses, and then the district action plan. You've been hearing about district action plan. That would actually come from the superintendent in January as well. So that would also impact our process. So we're hoping to have a good first version, I would say, sometime around February, where we can give you some real details of what we're thinking, where we're going to be. Of course, changes occur, as you well know, even in the last board meeting before it's approved. So our goal is to, in the normal calendar, by April, May timeframe, we have everything. With your considerations and your recommendations, they're already into place. And all the budgets from Central and the campuses are also in place in March, 1st of April. So it should coincide with with your recommendations in March. That's what I'm thinking.
Okay. So when we, just to maybe avoid misunderstandings, so when we see something that I would consider we're getting a first look at it,
Correct.
I would like to see something where you can say, okay, here's the proposed budget, and then here are the values associated with the key changes.
Absolutely.
That you're contemplating, both in terms of, increases and decreases in various areas, so that we have a handle on, for the new initiatives, right,
Absolutely.
how they're being funded.
Absolutely. So the key driver there is going to be the district action plans that come down from the superintendent, and then they will trickle up through the chiefs and the directors and everyone that's involved. Sure. Even though last year it was the first year we did it, and it seemed a little disorganized, but it actually was a good product at the end. We're trying to, instead of running around with pieces of paper, to kind of capture it all in one set in our budget tool. So we'll be able to report a little more directly instead of chasing changes and whatnot. So we're trying to improve that process, basically what I'm saying. But that will tie the dollars to what the new initiatives, whatever the initiatives are, whatever the district actions or the important pieces that will be coming onto the budget.
So you'll think then, pardon me, we'll see that, but when will we see that?
So I don't think we will get that in a very concise manner and where I can actually report it until possibly March, the end of March.
End of March. Mm-hmm. Okay.
Well, I noticed that.
And they will change, by the way. Because
well, I understand that.
Because the list starts, normally the way it starts is we need $100 million worth of new items. It's usually the way it starts, and then we have to align the revenue with the actual expenditure, so then items start getting crossed out and whatnot. So the list actually starts getting a little firmer, in April, and then sometimes in May and June. So.
Okay. I'm
This
sorry.
is based on what you're talking about, but based on what he's saying, we usually start at zero budget each year. Is it possible, for instance, each budget line code, you can state that, let's say that you had $100,000 in technology equipment. We only spent, then have a line to show how much was actually spent in that
Right.
area. You only spent 900.
Correct.
Okay. So consequently, you don't need, you might, for that current year, the upcoming year, you may not need to put in another 100,000 or 200,000.
That's correct.
So we never know how much was spent out of those.
So the campuses, again, it's all driven by formulas and all driven by
Right.
the projections. In terms of the central organizations, the way we do at this point in time is that whatever you had last year is your base budget.
Right, because you based it on students and...
No, this is for the central, for example, central offices. So any new dollars that you want to ask for have to be supported by a district action plan.
Right.
So you can't just ask for it. I mean, Velia can because she's in our department, but it has to be supported by an actual. Exactly. So any new dollars, that's the way we're approaching. Now, let's say, for example, that you have that $100,000 and you're not going to use it for technology or for whatever reason you had it.
And you didn't use any of it.
But you
goes
may
back
want
into
to
a
use
pool.
exactly. You may want to use that $100,000 to support the new initiative within your department, supported by an action plan. So you can realign those expenditures to support those sorts of things.
Right, but at the end of the year, in many cases, or in some cases, the funds are left there and were not used.
Correct.
And they were not transferred out of that line code to be spent somewhere else. But the money is there. Then we're coming back and saying that overall we're going to need. But I guess it would be difficult because you're really changing the entire system, showing what you had,
Correct.
what you spent.
So
Do we really need that?
You bring a very valid point where, for example, in not this past year, but the 2 years before that, maybe 3 years before that, when we were in cutting mode. So when we were in the cutting mode, actually we would meet with every organization to discuss every expenditure line item. And during those 3 years, we actually did a bunch of cutting of the things that you're talking about. And as a matter of fact, it was a mandatory 20% cut for every organization in the central offices. You're seeing, so we did do that. We did go and say, but you only spend $90,000. You don't need $100,000. Well, in the last year and into this coming year, it's becoming more of a wanting more money instead because of the cuts that we've made in the previous years. So again, we're looking at them closely. I think we have them aligned fairly good now, but we do analyze every single request to see if it makes sense. Now, if there is, a few dollars left at the end of the year for whatever, it might be a project that never came online, for example, or a software that was not acquired or whatnot, and those dollars do go back to the fund balance at the end of the year.
To the fund.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. All right.
So how's is March going to work, Jim, from previous? I just think last year it was kind of late. We didn't have much input. I mean, that's kind of the way I felt for the few meetings that I was here. I mean, it was totally different than the years past where, budgets were being brought to us, or sent to us, and but again, we were in cutting mode, so maybe that was the reason why. But I just don't know if that's enough time to.
Yeah, we were witnessing the process, the sausage making live, and now we're not going to get it till later in the process. We'll just have to see. I mean, I think our goal is to still try and make a recommendation in,
Because we got to see what we cut, and did we cut too much, and do we need to bring some of that back? And I don't know if we're having that discussion.
We're working on the benefit that several of us have the
knowledge.
granular knowledge that we got the first year, but we miss it. But in terms of big movements, Jim and I were just sitting here talking about, the big items are compensation, school choice.
In 2020,
Yeah, we have.
big pieces.
But what impact is that going to have on the cuts that we made 2-3 years ago?
Part of when we see it, I think at this point, is driven by when the board sees it, right?
Yes.
So the board's going to see it first.
That's correct.
Okay. And so you're planning to present it to the board when?
We normally do
Board briefing?
just a brief presentation. Not as much detail attached to it in March. I mean, we'll talk about it in February. We'll talk about it in March. The real meat of the budget, of course, honestly, it's in April.
Right. Okay.
I mean, that's when all your recommendations hopefully will be a component of decision making. And then all the pieces for central organizations will be there. All the pieces for the district action plans will be there. The campuses, pretty straightforward once we do the meetings. So April is really where you have the big pieces together, honestly.
And we had talked last year about making interim recommendations and then having a final recommendation. I think my thinking now is that we make the bulk of our recommendation in March, and then we can make supplemental recommendations if we get more information.
Because the way I understood it from the superintendent, I mean, he really wants to look at those recommendations and incorporate them into the budget. I mean, early instead of waiting till May. So that's the reason for the push.
Which conference are the principals and their budget?
In March, at the end of March, normally. Yes, ma'am. But again, I know what the budget's going to look for the campuses in March. I mean, I know in February. As soon as I get the calculations from Velia here, I can pretty much project what the camp, which is the bulk of it, what it will be.
Yeah.
I mean, so
Will we get that information?
I can certainly share it with you. I don't have a problem with that at all in one of our meetings.
Everyone else here, Luis and I are just looking at the schedule of who's presenting what, and you may not have seen this yet, but this came out.
Well, no, had it by email.
Yeah. And please correct me where I'm wrong here, but my sense is what we're moving towards is sort of a two-step process in terms of our recommendations to our trustees. I think there's going to be a first phase that will be comprised of probably two things. One, our reactions to things we've already heard about, right? And also our own ideas, okay, that we come up with based upon talking to teachers and parents and whatnot. And then there'll be a follow-up that will really have to do more with what we've learned as we've gotten more specifics out of the budget process. And the reason to do it in two steps is to make sure that our recommendation doesn't come so late in the process that it's really too late to move the ship, right? So, and of course the superintendent is expressing interest as well, so he'll have it not only with the trustees, but the superintendent will have a chance to hear about our preliminary thoughts. So Louisa is saying, March 17th here is the working date for when we're going to present our draft or at least first round recommendations. So be thinking about what you'd like to put in there.
We meet before?
We definitely, sure,
meeting?
we could do that. And then just look at the other things that are on the schedule and say, you know what, I don't know that I want to hear about that, or I want to hear about something else. More importantly, is there something I want to hear about, and maybe we could still adjust or add something to the schedule for February that would give you, some better information on which we could make a recommendation. And not that you can't add to it later, but is that?
That's fine.
Actually, that makes, I didn't even think about,
2 steps.
yeah, because of course you want to think about and learn about the things that are being recommended as a whole, and then focus your energies in trying to, hey, is this something good for the district or not, from your position. So it does make sense. It does makes total sense. I don't know why we hadn't thought about it. So I think the initial thought is, let's get your recommendations as part of the budget, so that they are included early enough and they're discussed by the administration, and have that thoughtful conversation about the recommendations. So